I had fallen asleep, and when I woke up, I was in the median between the eastbound and westbound lanes of Highway 20 at the border of Mississippi and Alabama. I mean, it was just shocking, as you can imagine. When I immediately tried to pull the vehicle back up on the highway, we started rolling. The wheels just lifted and we started rolling. We rolled across 2 lanes of highway. It's that moment where you're just sitting there and you're going, how can I go back 5 minutes? How can I go back 5 minutes? How can I reverse? Like your mind just goes crazy trying to think how can this be?
I want to ask you one last question about your children. We can't forget about them. So, will you share maybe just a couple of highlights of communication that you were just blown away by?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm really excited to share some of this with you.
My guest today is Julie Cluff, who 17 years ago lost her two youngest children in a horrific car accident where she was driving. Since then, she has been able to communicate with not only her children, but other spirits on the other side. She's been urged to learn about and teach people about angels, and she has created a grief program that might help you or someone you know. So, welcome, Julie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about our conversation today.
I am excited about our conversation today too, because one of the very most popular videos on this channel is the video that I did about signs and synchronicities. And I
Mm.
think that it's so important to have these subjects available because for a lot of your life, most people don't really think about these things. They don't tune into them. They slough them off as coincidences until something tragic happens and they experience a loss and then they begin searching and they find things like this. They find people like you. So, before this all happened, what was your life like?
Well, I had 3 children from my first marriage that ended in divorce, and then I remarried and we had 3 more children. So we were all living in the same house like the Brady Bunch gang. And and my and then I was homeschooling my kids. Life was good. Life was good. We were living in Houston, Texas at the time, and just really enjoying our children and all the activity. It was a busy household, as you can imagine. My oldest daughter had just headed off to college before everything happened, and our 2 youngest were, 10 and 8. And so we had the range. We had kids elementary, middle, high school, college. We just were busy.
I bet you were busy. So, I'm curious before you tell us your story, where were you on your path? Is this something communicating with spirits? Is this something that was already normal for you?
It was to a certain extent. I had had experiences, and because of my religious background, I kind of chalked it up to certain things that I had learned in religion because I'd had full-on conversations in my head with, what I called spirit um, previously, but those were just kind of out of the norm experiences. And then later, I figured out that these don't have to be out of the norm, that we can actually stay more connected and how to stay more connected and so on. So, yeah, to a certain extent, but when everything happened and became real, like I was always spiritual, but I wasn't the seeker that I became afterwards. If that makes sense, does that make
It
sense?
makes total sense because you sound very similar to how I was before my passed away loved one died. I was on a spiritual path. I believed in all these things, but I wasn't super seeking the way that you do after
Hmm.
you experience a loss. So, why don't you tell us your experience in any way that you would like to share it?
Sure, sure. So it all started on Mother's Day in 2007, this particular part of my story, and I was traveling across country with my 3 youngest children. My son, James, was 12, and he was in the front seat with me. We were traveling in an SUV, and I had my daughter, Carrie, who was 10, in the back seat, my son, David, who was 8, in the back seat, and we were having a beautiful day of travel, and mid-afternoon, shockingly, having never felt tired that whole entire day, shockingly, I woke up. I had fallen asleep, and when I woke up, I was in the median between the eastbound and westbound lanes of Highway 20 at the border of Mississippi and Alabama. I mean, it was just shocking, as you can imagine. And so when I immediately tried to pull the vehicle back up on the highway, we started rolling. The wheels just lifted and we started rolling. We rolled across 2 lanes of highway onto the shoulder of the highway. And when we landed, I couldn't see anything. And yeah, my eyesight was gone temporarily, and I was, of course, devastated. It's that moment where you're just sitting there and you're going, how can I get, how can I go back 5 minutes? How can I go back 5 minutes? How can I reverse? Like your mind just goes crazy trying to think, how can this be? And I could hear my son, James, in the seat next to me, and I could hear him crying. So I knew he was okay. I mean, I knew he was hurt, but I knew he was there and in the car with me. And um he was okay as you can be, right? My eyesight returned. I started looking, desperately looking around, seeing all the destruction around me, the glass broken. I mean, we rolled and rolled and rolled, and I was desperately looking and listening for Carrie and David. And when I looked off to my left, that's when I noticed that there were people gathering in the grass and that they had been thrown from the car. And now I look back on that. At the time, I thought these were people gathered in the grass with them, and there may have been a couple of physical people there, but I truly believe I was seeing angels with them, because there was such a crowd of people with them, and that doesn't even make sense, because when I go back to my memories, I'm like, I don't remember seeing cars pulled off to the road or anything. Um, but the fascinating thing is, and I wrote a book called Miracles in the Darkness, where I talk about the miracles that happened before, during, and after the accident. But during the accident, as the car was rolling, I heard a voice say, "Bring your arm in." It was calm. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, I had the presence of mind to bring my arm in. And it was shortly after that I learned about people who had lost their arm in rollover accident. And it was, as I reflected on that, of course, later, I was like, how could I? It was trying to rectify this idea that we were that angels, spirit guides, whatever terminology you want to use, was present at the accident to help me save my arm, but my kids were thrown from the car and they died. So it was this as you can imagine, it was heart-wrenching, it was heavy, it was hard. Then I had an experience after the accident, when James and I were in the hospital, where I just had this knowing. I just knew in my heart that it was like something was communicating to me to not be concerned about what other people said, which was so interesting. But, when you go through something really, really hard like that, people can come up and say, well, I know exactly how you feel, or they say like dismissive kind of things in order to help comfort. but in a lot of ways, it's, a lot of the things that we say as cliches aren't particularly comforting. But that was also such a gift to me because I just remembered that knowing that Carrie and David were okay. They were gone, but they were 100% okay. I knew that at the depth of my soul. I knew that it was me that wasn't okay. I knew that it was my family that wasn't okay. James needed surgery. The doctor that, and this is just crazy, but the doctor that actually um, developed the procedure he needed on his leg, he'd broken his leg, his right leg. The doctor that developed that procedure was at the hospital that day. He was the doctor, the surgeon that was on staff that day. It was Mother's Day. It was a Sunday. And I remember the staff and the hospital was named after his family. I mean, it's incredible that this horrible thing happened, but it happened at the exact place where James could get the care that he needed. And I remember the staff, I remember overhearing the nurse or the staff saying, I don't know why Dr. Rush is here. So I don't know why he's here today. And he was there and performed the surgery for James and he has no problem with his leg today because of that procedure. And even going forward, our family gathered, people came, we lived in Houston, I had family in Florida, I had family all over, and everyone gathered at that hospital. And James and I were in this room with this receiving room. So all the family was able to sit privately in this. I mean, they took such beautiful care of us. And I'm so grateful for that. And I also recognize heaven's help in those circumstances. And I see how that was orchestrated for our benefit. We had even the surgeon that I was talking about, we needed to get back to Houston for a funeral, unfortunately. And he took care of us. Like he made all the arrangements and coordinated with us for James to be able to leave the hospital. We were there for several days, but at that some point he was able to help us to figure out how to get back and to communicate with the doctors in Houston and help us to make that happen. So there were so many beautiful things, but I do not want to take away from the extreme pain, the overwhelming grief that we experienced. It was absolutely overwhelming. And yet, even in the pain of everything that we experienced, I had these moments where I could see the angelic help, the help of spirit guides, the help of I know that there was a whole team of people on the other side, angels, heavenly beings, spirit guides, a whole team, loving ancestors that were there, that were surrounding us, that were helping us. And everything that I've experienced since has confirmed that and more.
Well, first of all, I want to tell you that even though it was 17 years ago, the longing for somebody who's left this earth never leaves us. I mean, time absolutely is a healer, but I'm so sorry for your losses. It's just not the natural order of things to lose a child and then lose two. And then on top of that, Mother's Day. But I am so happy for you at the gifts that you've been able to receive out of something that is probably the most tragic thing that's ever happened in your life. So thank you for being willing to be vulnerable and share the story because I know that these stories are touching people who need them and they'll find this when it's right for them if they need it. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and another thing that happened, as I went to the hospital, the interesting thing that happened was two ambulances showed up. And one, because there were four of us and we were in an area, more of a rural area, one ambulance took Carrie and David to one hospital, and another ambulance took James and I to another hospital. So I laid on a striker board for a few hours, and I kept asking for updates on Carrie and David, and nobody was giving me any answers. So I laid there not knowing if they were gone or if they were alive. But I knew from the moment I was sitting in that car that they either went together or they both stayed. And as we went back through pictures, the pictures of them, there's so many pictures of them hugging each other. They were so close, and it was no mistake that they left together. But as I laid on that striker board in just obvious pain, I mean, I was in physical pain, but I had minor injuries, given the extent of the accident. My injuries were extremely minor, but I was in physical pain, but more, I was in emotional and mental anguish. And as I laid there, I had these moments of peace where in my mind's eye, I felt Jesus with me and I saw him, and we were standing in a field together, and he just stayed with me. And then I would come out of that visual and I would feel all the pain again. And then I would go back into being there with him and allowing him to um, comfort me. And that was a beautiful gift as well. So there were so many moments of recognition of the spirit world being right here. Um, if it's okay, I'd love to share a story that happened a few months later.
I would love to hear it, please. Yes.
I was in so much pain. I was dealing with PTSD. I was dealing with complicated grief. I was in so much shame. I was like the amount of pain that I heaped on myself was extreme. It was out of this world, incomprehensible. I could have never comprehended that much pain before all this happened. And and I rarely left the house for a few months. And eh, her neighbors, everybody took such beautiful care of us. And I know that that's not always the case. And so I want to recognize that there are people who grieve in isolation. And certainly there was aspects of that. And nobody was privy to the depth of my pain like I was because I was living in my own body. But a few months later, as Halloween, because this was in May, this was Mother's Day, as Halloween was coming up, and I walked into a drugstore and there were costumes hanging on the rack, and I saw this flowy, cute witch's costume, and my mind immediately went, Carrie would love this. And it's that split second where your brain still hasn't completely uh, assimilated the idea that she's not here. And so I had this thought, Carrie would love this. And then of course the all the anguish and the pain came in, and like, she's not here. There is no going to be no costume this year. There is no Halloween trick-or-treating this year. And when I thought that, I heard in my mind, she's right where she's supposed to be. And it was a confirmation like I had gotten in the hospital that they were okay, that things were as they were supposed to be. Of course, I couldn't completely um, integrate that in for months and months. But I had this voice in my head that said, she's right where she's supposed to be. And I thought, but why, how can that be? And why did it have to happen the way that it did? And the voice came again and said, how would you have liked it to happen? And I can tell you that I stood there in that store and my brain went searching. And there is no good answer to that question. And when a soul's path is for them not to be on the earth for more than 8 and 10 years, there's an exit plan. And that was their exit plan. And I don't have to love it. I don't have to like it. I didn't even have to completely accept it in that moment, but that was communicated to me. And I was able eventually to come to terms with that and to recognize that I had a choice. My soul plan had a choice. I had a choice before I came here. I could be their mother for 8 and 10 years or not be their mother. And I choose that 8 and 10 years again and again and again.
That is so beautiful. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy that you brought this up. We're going to go in 3 different directions with this. Number 1, you touched on something that I think is such a big part of our incarnation into this human experience from a soul, and that is that we pick our parents. And it's a soul contract, meaning all parties, because of free will, must agree. And I love that you brought that up because I don't know that everybody watching is familiar with that. But what this does is I feel like conversations like this and topics like this, and if they're new to you watching, put some stuff down in the comments. You can ask questions. I'll come back and I'll answer them. If Julie can, she can answer them too, because I know a lot of people do not understand what this truly means. But the implication of it is that when bad things happen, there was nothing that you or anybody else could have done to prevent it, because that path was set in motion for a very particular reason. I believe for you, based on our conversations that we've had and the work that you're doing with IONS and the work that you're doing with your group, your grief program, I believe that part of your contract in coming in here was to help other people in this way. And the only way you could do that is to walk through the experience that you had. And we talked before this, and Julie, you are such a healthy, grounded person, like the way that you've come through this experience. And I love that you talked about it being a choice, because again, some people have a terrible experience and they curl up in a ball and they stop living. And I don't think that anybody who left this planet would want that for another human being, another soul.
Yeah,
So we speak to that a little bit, what you've learned.
absolutely. One of the things that came to mind is that in my unique circumstances, because everybody's circumstances are unique, in my unique circumstances, I was in the same car. My my son James was in the same car. We could have left too. We didn't. I had minor injuries after we had rolled at least a half a dozen times. Um, and I recognized that there's a reason I'm still here. And I was determined to figure out, why am I still here and they're not? And I feel like part of our contract was that they are like, since that happened, I had to go through this extreme grief season, but then I had this awakening 3 years later where literally within 24 hours, I felt like a new person. And I just had this miraculous, and it doesn't all work that way, but healing of any kind is a miracle no matter how it happens. And I just want to reiterate that. But the the contract, I feel like part of our contract was knowing, because I actually had experiences a month, 2 months before they passed away that was like, these are so odd, these experiences that I was having. I walked into a funeral, I had all this download of information. I was like, what is this about? Like, I was taught things about the person who was grieving their spouse who had passed away. And I was like, I don't, where is this coming from? Well, after the accident, it started, months after the accident, when I had some healing in place, I was able to go back and go, my soul knew what was going to happen. And I
course.
was being taught and trained, if you
Nurtured.
will, nurtured, inspired to understand things before it even happened. And I didn't know why this information was coming to me. There was a whole conversation in a car one day, and I had this. I won't even go into all of that because it's too much to go into it in one conversation. But I realized that I knew before this even happened. And then part of our contract was that they would go, I would stay, and that experience would open a portal, would open a connection, would open a conduit for them and for me here to be a, a speaker of hope, to be able to bring through messages from spirit, to bring through messages from angels. I've since been able to bring through messages for people from their loved ones that are on the other side. It just opened, and I've said since this happened, I feel like I live in both worlds.
Mm. Well, let's go back a second to something that you said a little bit ago. And you said healing is a miracle. And you described the state that you were in before you had this miraculous healing where you didn't feel like the same person anymore. And you talked about two emotions. You talked about pain and you talked about shame. And what I wanted to say about that is I'm sure that there are people that are listening or somebody who's listening who knows somebody who's in that place that you were in, the place of pain and shame. I was at IANS at the International Association for Near Death Studies. We were both there a couple months ago, and there was somebody speaking, and they were talking about the vibration of different emotions. And I thought that hate was the probably the lowest vibration emotion, but scientifically it's been measured that it's shame. And shame can do a number on us when we are in that place, and especially if it's a shame and a blame. So I'm going to ask you something, and you do not have to answer this. But because you said that people tried to come to you and comfort you and they weren't doing a wonderful job, and you were already in your shame, in your grief place, will you share with us what is the least kind, the worst comment that was ever made to you, if you are willing to share it, and how you dealt with it? Because you're here in the shame level, and now you're here in this empowerment and love, and you've bridged that gap. It's a massive gap to bridge. And the people that are watching, I want them to be able to take away from our conversation something that they could be like, all right, I can start to use this if I'm way down here where the shame and the pain is.
Okay, so that's a big question, and I do want to I do want to kind of go back a little bit, and what you're referring to is Dr. David Hawkins' levels of consciousness, and at the lowest level of consciousness is what he labeled as despair. But if you read his material, despair and shame, shame is in that bucket. It's the lowest level of consciousness, and of course, Dr. Brene Brown has done a beautiful job of making us aware of shame and the need. I actually was doing a training on this just last night, so it's interesting
Well,
that
there's
you
a
bring this up.
confirmation.
Exactly. And she has famously said, it's famous in my world, um, she has famously said that shame cannot survive talking about it. It cannot survive the light. So the minute we express our shame, the minute we talk to a friend, a therapist, a coach, someone, and we share the horrific circumstances of our situation. I lost a brother to suicide. That was another, shame experience for my family, especially 30 years ago when things were not as well, but people weren't as educated, I would say.
Receptive,
Right.
receptive.
Right. And so it's interesting. So if you're feeling that shame, which is, like I said, right down there with despair, it's really, really vital that you find someone safe that you can express what you're feeling, because it cannot survive compassion and it cannot survive being spoken. So shame will dissipate as you share your experience with a compassionate listener. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say on that. It's interesting for me because, when you asked that question and I was kind of searching my memory banks, because I had that insight early on to
That
to
to other
just
people didn't matter what their opinion was.
yeah. And because I recognized in myself that I was horrible at supporting people that grieved. I never knew what to say. I didn't know how to approach that. And so I gave so much allowance to people because I was like, I just recognized that anything anybody said, they were saying it with a very few exceptions. They were saying it out of love. And so if I could focus on the intention instead of the words, then it helped to ease the pain of that, right? I'll just mention a couple of things. I had a friend one day say to me, and it was shortly after the accident, and she said to me something along the lines of, well, at least they're with God and Jesus and all this. And I thought, and my immediate reaction was, they need to be here with me, right? I want them here with me. And so that feels comforting. And I knew that, right? I had that like immediate knowing that they were okay. But for someone to say that to me felt jarring to my being in that moment because I wanted them here. And that is such an innocent thing to say. And people will say things like that. The other thing that comes to mind, and I actually remembered this a couple of weeks ago, and I don't remember why, but so my kids were, we were homeschooling and they were young and their friends were hurting too. And I actually, before I tell this, I just want to go back and say we were very well cared for. People were loving and kind. Our homeschool group came over and planted flowers in our yard. People brought us food for months, and we were overflowing. I was playing on a tennis team, and the tennis group coordinated meals, and our church group coordinated meals, and the neighborhood coordinated meals, and my husband's work I mean, we were so well taken care of. So I don't want to give the impression that we weren't, because we totally were. But I do want to share something that happened. So in the homeschool group, a few months later, I was taking a few of the kids somewhere, and they were jumping in the car, which is interesting to me because I'm like, I don't even know why I was driving because I rarely drove for months after that. But for whatever reason, that day I was driving this short distance with the kids, and this one boy that it was Carrie's age, as he was jumping in the car. Now, mind you, he's 11 years old, and he says something along the lines of, "What if there's an accident?" Like, he's aware that I caused this accident, and it was so like I was already in this heightened state of emotion, and to hear that, and it's just like the shame and the guilt was just in my face. And this was like a kid, he didn't know any better. And so I had to look at the circle, it would have been really easy for me, especially in that vulnerable space, to be really upset about what was said and to go, because I knew people were talking about it. It's just natural, right? Um, and another situation that happened is my daughter, who was, a young adult. She was 18, 19 at the time, and she had been at somebody's house, and the mom had said, studies show that they should have been in different car seats and this and that and the other. And she came home so upset. Like, why would this mom say this? Like, there's nothing that can be done at this point. And of course, this was years ago. Car seats, all that stuff has changed since then, but this was years and years ago. So things like that, where people are insensitive, but I don't think they mean bad by it. I've worked with so many clients, and with there's a handful exceptions where somebody is being cruel, but most of the time it's innocent. Most of the time it's well-meaning even. They're okay. They're with God. They're with Jesus. They're with your grandma. They're with, whatever is said, right? Um, that's there's no ill will. It's just people trying to find answers and trying to find
And
ways
trying to
to
make it
comfort.
better, right? Trying to make it
Yeah.
better somehow in their little way.
And
I want
if you're listening and you have somebody in your life that's grieving, I would just share that you can't make it better. Like you, and so if we can just let go of making it better and just be there. We don't
yeah,
have to make it better. We
right.
just get to be there, listen, allow them to say the crazy things that people say after grief. Allow them to say those crazy things and don't make it mean too much.
I love
So,
it. I'm so thankful that you shared all of that. Thank you for being vulnerable. Brene Brown is very proud right now. But let's talk about why it's so important to let go of that shame and that pain. Because for the people that are watching and that are stuck in that place right now, or know somebody who is, when you stay in that place, every emotion has a vibration and it can actually get stuck in your body and manifest as something, an
yeah.
illness, any type of lots of different things that can get stuck. And that's not good. But the other and maybe more important, more motivating, because sometimes we won't do things for ourselves, but we'll do something because somebody else is involved. But when you're at that low vibration, it's harder for our spirits on the other side, our souls that we want to connect with that are on the other side, they already have to lower their vibration a lot to speak with us, to communicate with us, to send us signs. But it's really hard for them to get to you if you're even lower than we normally are, just because we're human. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit too?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a couple of things along those lines. Just the experience of grief can cause experiences of shame. So when we're thinking thoughts like I should be doing better than I am, that's a shame thought. Give yourself, and this is hard to do, and it's something that we have to practice, and all these things, none of these things are overnight, um, solutions. It's all practice. Uh, Moving through grief, and a lot of people don't look at it this way, and have heard the phrase, time heals all wounds, but it actually takes effort. In order to move through grief is part of the healing process. And this is really important to understand that grief is not the problem. It's what we think about grief that's the problem. So
Hmm.
if we can just allow the pain, allow the grief, and allow the moments that sneak in where we feel happy or we feel joyful, we resist those moments too because we think, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way because this and this and this happened. My loved one died. So how can I have any happiness? Um, Allowing all the emotion, just allow it instead of having judgment about the emotion. You're right where you're supposed to be. Wherever that is, you're right where you're supposed to be. Now, it's okay to be to recognize that you're right where you're supposed to be and want something more. That's okay. That's okay. The pain is evidence, just like physical pain is evidence that healing is needed. The pain is evidence that there's emotional healing that's needed. So it's just all part of the process. And now I've totally forgotten the original question.
No, you were right on there with the original question. You answered all of it. There's a shirt, it's more related to sports, but it really fits right here. And it says, pain is the way your body gets rid of its weakness.
Yeah. But we don't recognize that. I use physical pain all the time because people are so familiar with that. You know, if you broke your ankle and you kept running on it because there was no pain, then you would just do more damage. So the pain stops you in your tracks and says, I need to take care of this. So your emotional pain is the same thing. It's stopping you in your tracks saying, I need to take care of this. I need to take care of myself. And so it does, it slows you down and there's a purpose for that. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely a purpose. And I love that this journey for you. So you're in this place of pain and you're in this place of grief and you're in this place of shame. And then you have a couple of things that happen to you that start to turn the tide. And I think maybe the first one was hearing, how would you have liked it to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Because that again is that reminder that you were never in control of that destiny. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that once people can really assimilate a thought like that, it's the starting point for them to begin letting go and letting them forgive themselves for what happened and stop the blame of, I should have done this, I could have done that, and spinning that hamster wheel in the mind over and over again and never ever getting resolution because you're just going in the same circle. But
Yeah.
once you can let that go, I think that's the time that the healing starts to come in.
I totally agree. It was actually the third year that was the hardest for me because that's when I kept thinking I should be doing better than I am. And
Hmm.
all that shame,
We're the worst. We are the worst to ourselves, aren't we?
aren't we? All that shame because I had lost my brother previously. I'd gone through some really hard things. My life was set up that way to go through some hard things so I could be in this place to develop, the hope model of healing and to do the work that I do now and to experience this this communication between worlds and all of this, right? But it was set up that way. So I had enough. One of the things that was a benefit for me is I'd had enough experience with grief to know, yeah, this is hard, and it's okay that it's hard, and it's okay if I stop in my tracks right now and I let everything else go so that I can just be here in this pain right now. And so for the first several months, even though it was like horrendous, it's every time I think about how hard it was, it's just mind boggling to me that I experienced that. But I was actually things were progressing and I was coming to some understanding and I was healing over time. But then I got to a place where I was like, and this is the messy middle where it gets really, really hard because we're in this middle spot where we can start to see our life moving forward, but we're still experiencing the heaviness of pain, of the grief. And in that spot, we start telling ourselves we should be doing better. And that's where we heap shame on top of the grief. And that shame prevents us from being able to continue to move through the pain of grief.
Wow. So insightful. And I hope that everybody listening is taking notes and really hearing all of these messages. So you're coming out of this, and then you mentioned that you had an awakening. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's been okay. So um this is really interesting because this happened in 2010. It was 3 years almost to the day of the accident. It was 3 years later, and I just recently, and this is really interesting, I just recently made the connection that through some very unusual circumstances, I was at Stonehenge like the week before this happened. And
And that's what you were talking about the portals.
I never put the two together until probably 6 months ago. I'm telling you, I'm still learning things from
Okay,
this
so let's talk
experience.
about Stonehenge for a second because this is fascinating. Stonehenge is looked at as an energy vortex because of the ley lines that it is put on by very ancient people in a very sacred way that line up with other vortexes, including the Great Pyramid and all types of things all over the earth. So now that you look back and you're like, I was there, what does that mean to you? And what do you think those are?
Well, if you are familiar with the energy systems in the body, the chakra system, Stonehenge is considered by many to be a chakra system of the earth. So it's an
I have actually
energy,
never heard that before. That's
yeah,
really fascinating to me.
but it's very, very similar to what you're explaining, right? It's a vortex, it's a place where energy is held. And I had never put that together, but the only reason I was there was because my husband had a trip to London and he was afraid to leave me at home because I was doing so poorly. So he took me on this business trip with him, and then we ended up on a side trip to Stonehenge and walked around that whole thing. And I never even connected that until, like I said, just a few months ago. But
So
then
do you think that that was part of why you had that awakening, that experience?
yeah, there were three things that lined up that I can look back on and recognize in this moment. There will be new new discoveries. This is the thing. Nobody knows all of it, right? We share our stories to open I listen to the stories to open me up to new possibilities and new understandings. Hopefully people listen to my story and receive new understanding and new enlightenment. This is the beauty of us being human and sharing our stories, is because that helps all of us. I'm helped when people share, and hopefully people are shared when or helped when I share. But I had this so in April of that year, I I was in such a bad place. Like I was in such a bad place. I was like, when I think back and I put myself in that space where I was, it was like I was walking through life as a zombie and I was desperate for help. And so I was saying things to people about how poorly I was doing, kind of in code, and not really coming out right out and saying I'm crashing, but I was just saying these little things, and I had a few people that just said some things that opened me up. And one example is I was at an event, and this woman and I, a friend of mine, we had drifted behind a group of people that were walking ahead of us, and I was sharing with her. I told her, I said, I feel like God is punishing me. That's how I felt. At that point, I just, with even with all this confirmation that they were okay, that, that I just couldn't integrate it. And so I just felt like what had happened was a punishment because I hadn't been good. I mean, it's crazy talk now. When I think about it, it's crazy talk. But at the time, that's what it felt like. I was under this weight. God was punishing me. And she said, everything God does is to bless us. And when she said that, I like, I went, could that be true? And my mind started going there and started to like, it was a spark moment. Like, those moments where there's just like this light comes through and says, woo, pay attention. It was one of those moments. That was so I also want to share in this, or in this piece here, is that we're talking about connecting with our loved ones on the other side. it's not likely you're going to connect with your loved ones on the other side in the middle of grief. And I have worked with
Right.
people who are frustrated because they can't connect. It's okay. It's okay. Just know, just keep the thought in your mind that they're okay, that they're loving you, that they're around you. You don't even have to notice any synchronicities or anything. Just keep that in your mind that they're loving you, that they're supporting you, that they're around. And
And
every
they
time you
hear
think of
every
them,
thought, right? They hear every single thought, anything that we are communicating with them, they've heard it, they've received it.
yeah. And since then, my kids have confirmed, we were there. I remember my son came through at one point. He's like, that was so hard to watch you suffer because I think they feel what we're feeling. Now, they're okay. Don't take any I don't say that to say, hey, stop suffering so your people on the other side aren't suffering. They're okay. They're completely loved and supported in all of it. Anyway, she said that, and that was just like a little opening. And then we had that trip to London, and that was another little opening. And then I experienced a prayer, is like almost like a prayer circle type experience. And I literally I remember walking to that room like a zombie. I was just like the darkness was so great that it was tangible within me. I could feel it and see it. I was just filled with this dark energy. And then this prayer happened, and then everything started to lift. And within 24 hours, I felt like a brand new person. And I was re-engaging with life again. Now, not to say everything was perfect from there, because there was more healing to do after that, but it was uh, a complete, the lights came on. The lights
What
came
do you
on.
think it was about it being a prayer?
I think I think whatever your spiritual practices are, whatever your rituals are, whatever you do, when you place meaning on that and attention and intention, there's power in it. We have
Amen.
a yeah, we have a tendency to say, well, my way of doing this is right, and my way of doing that, like everybody's in their corner going, no, you got to do it this way. It's not about how we do it. It's about the intention of it.
Yes. Yes,
And the
that's true.
man that was offering the prayer, I believe, is a true healer. And he wasn't totally clued into that, but I do believe he was a healer, and I brought um enough desire and hope that it opened the lights for me. It brought the
Wow.
lights for me.
Well, I
And
don't want to.
I like to say that before all this happened, I was sleepwalking through life. And after it happened, I died. I mean, I literally died. I had to rebuild my whole life. I had to rebuild my whole understanding. And now it's like I'm finally alive. Like I feel more alive now than I did before all this happened, which is crazy. And we talked earlier about how healing is a miracle. Healing is a miracle, just like when you cut your finger and it heals, it's a miracle. It's not to say that it's only available to certain people, because I truly believe that spiritual healing, emotional healing is available to everyone. And and
Everyone.
and to whatever extent that is, right? Like um we can all experience a level of healing.
Yep, I think that that's the path for sure. So before we get to, I know that people are probably chomping at the bit to talk to you, to work with you, but I want to ask you one last question about your children. We can't forget about them. So will you share maybe just a couple of highlights of communication that you were just blown away by?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm really excited to share some of this with you. One thing is, they were 8 and 10 when they passed away. And when I communicate with them, they come through as mature spirits. They come through with just this beautiful light and just this, I'm going to say, divine presence. I mean, it's really really wonderful. And that's how I experience them, because I know that they're mature spirits. They're not 10 and 8 anymore, right? And so that's how I experience them. One of the ways that I started connecting with them was through writing letters and listening for the answers. So I'll write, like my daughter's birthday was a couple weeks ago, and I just wrote to her. Um, Actually, the letter last year on her birthday, I wrote and I said, happy birthday. They probably don't celebrate that there, but and I was just kind of sharing some things with her. And when she answered back, she said, you're right. We don't celebrate it here, but we love to be remembered. And I'm so glad we love to connect. And so that was kind of a fun message that she shared. Um, but
What I
I
hold on a second, stop a second. I am so happy that you shared that. What a great idea, because it's putting something in, again, what you talked about, intention, focus, energy. How much more powerful that is than just thinking that thought. Just the act of doing that probably is more likely to get a response for somebody who's searching and not already readily getting signs.
Yeah, it's a beautiful communication. It's a beautiful way to communicate, because I love putting things on paper, and I do this. I realized that I found my journal from 2010 a few months ago. And at the beginning of that is just like all the shame and the and the pain and all that my therapist was making me write down. And then there's this break. And then June of that year, I started asking questions and getting answers, asking questions. And I've been doing that since 2010. So
Okay, well, tell
when
us about that process, because other people that are listening are like, "What? What did you do? That's pretty cool."
I'm telling you, it is really interesting. I didn't even realize what I was doing until last year, when everything just opened up in this big, massive way. And I started getting all these messages, and I share messages, angel messages, on Instagram every week. I receive these messages and I share
Beautiful.
them. I just go in with intention. I say, what message would you like for me to share? And they give me a 2 or 3 sentence message to share. I have literal pages and pages. Now, back then I was writing things down. I would write a question, I would just listen, and whatever I was thinking or feeling, I would write it down. And over time that developed into more and more and more. And now I I have to verbally record, and I set my I get pages and pages of insight and information from my angel team by just that practice of asking questions and listening. But let me speak to this for just a second about this idea of writing letters and listening for the answers. It, it's going to feel weird at first. Just here's what really helps. What really helps is when we go into that space with love. And that's why it's challenging when we're still in grief, because we're in that space where all the memories, even the good memories, are hard and painful. But there comes a time when you do the work of grief that those memories are beautiful again. Those memories are wonderful again. And so you bring that love into that space. You express your love for them. And when you go into that with love, so the way I do it is I just say, dear Carrie or dear David, and I write a little note and I say, love you, mom, finish it however I feel to finish it in that moment. And then I write, dear mom. And I just write whatever comes.
It's like
And
automatic writing, which
yeah,
some people might be familiar with.
yeah. And you're gonna feel like you're making it up. And
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 what was the pivotal moment where you knew that you were not making that up?
Well, I'd go back and reread it and go, I didn't make that up. I'm like, I did not make that up. Like that, I would never have said
Because
that.
you would know what you would make up, and you're like, this isn't it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's going back and rereading it. And that's another thing I love about writing it down is that you capture it and you can go back and reread it. Like just even like I said a couple weeks ago when Carrie's birthday, I went back and reread my letter and her message from a year ago. Um, so yeah, so that's one way. And again, we I'm thinking of a couple of clients that I've worked with, and they had lost their son to suicide. And the dad was receiving, it was really interesting. I saw this visual when I was working with him of this cloud of grief around him. That was what it presented like. And it was like every once in a while, they showed me this visual where the cloud just parted a little bit and he would get a message from his son. And then the cloud would come back in again, and then he would doubt that message from his son. So it was just a reminder that when we receive those little messages, like when I when I heard, you know, where would you have liked, how would you have liked it to happen? Or when I got that knowing that they were okay, like, we'll have moments that we'll doubt it. But just allow yourself to be in that space of possibility that all that you're receiving is for your greater good and is love being shared with you, power being shared with you, grace and beauty and divine light and all of it. You're just receiving that, and that and whether it's grief or just doubt in general, that cloud of doubt will come over every once in a while and we'll go, oh, I mean, I do this to myself. I must be crazy. I must be crazy. Um, but you'll have these confirmations that go, nope, you're not crazy. You're not crazy. So I wanted to share this other experience that I had. I I had had this so I was on a cruise. It was almost 2 years ago. I was on a cruise and we got on a whale watching trip, and the whale watching trip was in the afternoon. We were in Cabo and in Mexico, and it was in the afternoon and I was tired, and they were making us wait around and they were marching us up and down the dock to go to the bathroom and stuff. I'm like, when are we getting on? And then they took us to this boat, and it was like an oversized life raft. And I'm like, really? Is this what we're gonna go? I mean, I was grumpy. I was, bottom line, I was grumpy. I was totally grumpy. And I got on this thing, it was uncomfortable. We were like, it was I was slammed up against the side of this raft basically, and then we got out there and we'd see a tail off in the distance. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a bust. I was not bringing any good energy to this whale watching trip. And all of a sudden I heard this, Julie, you have angels. And my energy lifted and I went, I have angels. And in my head, I started saying, please, thank you for bringing the boat close to the whales. Thank you for bringing the whales close to the boat. Thank you. And within 10 minutes, we were surrounded by whales and dolphins in the
Come
most
on. I
spectacular
love
show
it.
you have ever seen. And our guide was like, oh my gosh, you guys have the best energy. This is amazing. I mean, he was all excited. Like, we literally had a couple on this side, a couple in front of us, a couple on this side, a whole group of a pod of dolphins swimming along and coming up out of the water. And at the end, as they started to because it was time for us to go back to shore, as they started to dissipate, this one whale came up, and I don't even remember what you technically call it, but that where they slapped the water. And he was right there, and he just slapped the water over and over and over again, like he was waving goodbye. Well, and it was the next day I received the message to start teaching about angels. And so I went home and immediately started doing webinars on angels.
You're like, okay, I'll do it.
I'll do it. This is fun. But it was a few months later, I got a message from my kids that they were there, that they were
Of course
helping.
they were there.
I know. I know. So, yeah, there's so much,
They were
as
they
you
were
know.
writing all of them. They're like, "We're going over this way. Come on."
Yeah, I'm not sure who whispered in my ear and reminded me that I have angels, but thank you to whoever that was, that reminded me, got through just a little bit of my grumpiness and said, "You've got angels." They honor our agency. They honor our choices. So it's up to us to choose to connect and choose to and I was just in a spiritual meeting last night. Somebody said this is like a support group, and I said, yeah, spirituals addicts support group. And yeah, it just reminded me of last night. I shared with them, I said, the hardest part is we compare our experiences with other people.
Mm,
And that's what I was going to say
I
about
think
this
that that's what
couple.
I've experienced a lot too, and it is hard because you hear these stories of people having these experiences, and if you're the one that's not, then you're like, "Why not me?" And then you start going down that path of what's wrong with me. So it's hard. It's definitely the best to not compare because everybody's so unique, and your spirits on the other side are going to speak to you in whatever way you need them to, and they're gonna speak to me and to you, Julie, in whatever way you need them to.
Exactly. And it's just, allowing that to happen and recognizing. One of the biggest things that happened for me was one of the times when I started to, I mean, it's been a development, right, over time. I started keeping notes on my phone, and every day I would write down all the synchronicities that I experienced, all the numbers, all the. One day I was walking on a trail near my house, and four cardinals were playing in the trees in front of me on the path. And two on this side, two on this side, and then they would go across the trail like this. And I kept waiting for them to fly away, and they kept doing that as I was walking closer and closer. I got so close to them, and like, and you just feel that uplift of, oh, that's not just normal. That's not just normal. That is a angel message. So
Yes.
anyway, it is a joy. And also just, that comparison thing. I've just spent, an hour or whatever it's been sharing the highlights of 17 years. We can all, if we have that conversation with our guides, with our angel team, and say, help me to remember the things, those synchronicities, those ways that I've been blessed. Help me to remember those things, and start writing down some of the memories that you have, and start recording the dreams that you have, the numbers that you see. Numbers are big for me. Nature is big for me. I'm sitting on my back porch one day, and this huge bumblebee came up and just hovered right in front of my face. I wasn't scared or anything, but he just hovered right there in front of my face. I'm like, okay, I gotta go look up what bumblebees mean. What's the message?
I love it. Well, sometimes it's just nature and spirit getting our attention, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Julie, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening have been able to take some little nuggets that they can apply to their lives, but you do so much more. You talked about your book, Miracles in the Darkness, and you also mentioned that you've developed a grief program. So, if people want to connect with you, what do you have to offer, and how can they get in touch?
Well, the easiest thing to do, and I hesitate to share this because it's in development. We just barely put up a site on juliecluff.com, but it will link you to Build a Life After Loss website where I have all my grief resources. I have 180 podcast episodes on grief and healing. We have a coach training program where we train uh, coaches on grief awareness and how to help clients in grief. Yeah, so we just have a lot of resources there. And then we have a button for the new podcast that's being launched next week. So all this is in development. So if you go there and you're like, this, things look a little wonky here, it's because it's all in development, literally brand new.
Well, this is, and these
juliecluff.com.
videos live in in perpetuity. So let's just say that this is October of 2024, brand new. You might be watching this 10 years from now. You're like, this isn't new.
Exactly. But yeah, on juliecluff.com, we're going to be adding courses and we're going to be adding, but it has the links to the podcast that's coming out in November 2024. It has the link to Build a Life After Loss, and that's been there. Build a Life After Loss has been there for years, so it's got a lot of resources there. And you can find a angel ebook that's available on the page. That's just a brief ebook that shares a little bit about how to connect with your angels. So
That's wonderful. Wow. This has been such an uplifting conversation to go through what you have gone through and to be here where you are now. And granted, I know it's been 17 years, but for you to have taken that loss and transitioned and turned it into something that gives back to so many people is such a blessing and a gift. And I just want to thank you so much for what you are doing to help the collective consciousness. You are helping to raise the vibration and helping people to heal. And the world needs so much of that right now.
thank you, Lori.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.